受不了，我要87啊！川普說了不會飛行9500英里來保護台灣，怎麼辦？這位啊，我從後台看，如果不是粉紅啊，應該就是小草。查了一下他的發言記錄，這人到現在連柯文哲都還在聲援。那不用我多說了，只是這幾天川習會結束之後，川普的其中幾句話的確讓中共網軍小粉紅、自台舔共人士等像是撿到寶一樣，拿來斷章取義帶風向，擴散以美論。我頻道上也出現不少這種粉紅留言來亂湊，你的美爹把台灣賣了，不能醫美。你看他們那麼乖，川普一說，他們連更新都安靜了。川普訪華這麼大事，怎麼不播啊？啞巴啦！大家就看看這些破腦粉紅有多麼在意我的想法。但我不是不更新，我頻道是周更啊！真受不了你，愛看又愛看，有事情但還沒看我開口的話，就跑來關心我。怎麼不說啦？還有看到這種擴散醫美論，結果被我抓到反串了。不要再吹捧美國，不要再吹捧川普了，請把真實情況給台灣人民。川普每次出訪都是目中無人，唯我獨尊，但到了中國卻裝起孫子了。別裝了啦！從後台看你過往發言記錄，就是都在幫中共說話，還被我抓到有簡體字留言的，裝什麼台灣人？你是覺得承認自己是中國人很可恥嗎？可憐啊！川習會之後啊，現在網絡上充斥着以美論的留言，但在進入還原事實的環節之前，我有個問題想要問一下這些擴散以美論的人：你們過往的言論大多都是講美國不是真的支持台灣，還有藍白草會認為美國是要掏空台灣，什麼美積電啊，然後美國賣台這類以美言論，大家在網絡上應該看過很多吧？那我就想問，美國真要賣台的話，是賣給誰？不就是賣給你們這類親共人士喜愛的中共國嗎？那這樣的話，美國如果真的賣台給中國，你們是在哭什麼哭？你們以美論者不是更應該支持才對嗎？沒講錯吧？如果順着他們那種以美論的邏輯來說的話，那這些親中共人士應該要開心才對啊！怎麼最後會變成美國抗中你也罵，美國幫台灣你也罵，美國如果不幫台灣你還是罵？這些人到底要幹嘛啦？而且這次川習會看完，我認為美國的立場其實表達得很清楚，就跟過往一樣嘛，就是誰都不能片面改變台海現狀。而且你就想，如果美國真的想要放棄台灣，最簡單的方法其實是減少軍售，撤出印太，不要管台海。可是實際上是什麼？是美日澳合作加強，對中科技封鎖升級，甚至不斷強化台灣的戰略地位，不是嗎？人家美國受訪時，如果有注意聽，也是這樣說的。先進一段1分鐘廣告，稍後馬上回來帶各位看一下美方受訪時實際上是怎麼講的。今天影片進入正題之前，要先感謝 Celisin 贊助本集影片。許多人想象中的出國旅遊是一下飛機就能優雅地打卡發限動，但實際情況往往像是在機場迷路的孩子，為了網路焦慮找櫃檯排隊租 WiFi 機或買國外網卡，然後還得花費心力保管換下來的台灣信卡，避免遺失。本來是出國旅遊的，搞得像是出國實習當網管。如果說時間就是金錢，那出國旅遊的時間，我想是美金加黃金。因此各位今後出國別再浪費時間處理這些雜事了，推薦各位一條更輕鬆的路 Celisin 只需出國前1分鐘，手機按一按就能搞定所有上網需求。用法非常簡單，你就在出發前下載 Celisin 的 App， 選好要去的國家跟網絡方案後，你就完成所有的前置作業了，是不是超方便？抵達目的地下飛機後，打開手機就能連接網絡，省去換卡或排隊租 WiFi 機的時間，也省下包包空間，無需待在機場花費時間處理網絡問題。那我實際使用起來，覺得操作單純之外，連線品質也相當穩定。App 也會顯示剩餘多少網絡流量能使用，不夠就直接加。有任何問題也能詢問線上客服，一鍵線上搞定，省時又省力。現在就點選影片下方專屬連結 celi.com/PorterKing 下載 Celi， 記得結賬時輸入專屬優惠代碼 PorterKing， 能夠享有獨家85折優惠哦。出國上網用 Celi， 一鍵連結超便利。OK， 那我們按照受訪先後時間帶各位分別來看幾段影片。首先第一段是川習會還在進行中，美國現任國務卿盧比奧應該說是盧比奧，因為盧比奧以前被中共制裁不能去中國，但這次川普要帶去嘛，所以這次中共就把它改成盧比奧。雖然是同一人但名字不一樣，就又能進去中國了。昨日的通緝犯，今天的座上賓，你以為畫紅線，實際上鋪紅毯啊。那我們看一下盧比奧是怎麼說的。
President Xi stressed to President Trump that the Taiwan question is the most important issue in China-U.S. relations. Talk to me about that moment when that was discussed.
Well, they certainly feel that way, and they always raise that issue, and we understand they raise that issue. From our perspective, any forced change in the status quo and the situation that's there now would be bad for both countries. One of the things the Chinese emphasize, which we agree, is strategic stability in our relationship, a constructive relationship, but also one that establishes strategic stability so that we don't have misunderstandings that could lead to broader conflict. And so we always reiterate the point. We hear them when they say this. We always respond by saying anything that would compel or force a change in what we have now would be problematic. And we would certainly, our policies on that have not changed. It's been pretty consistent across multiple presidential administrations and remains consistent now.
Did President Xi request to President Trump not to sell weapons to Taiwan?
Well, that topic has been discussed in the past. It did not feature prominently in today's discussion. We know what their position on that is already. Remember, Congress plays a role in that process as well. And we have sold them weapons in the past. That's existed as recently as December, which they were very upset about. And that's a decision the president gets to make as Congress appropriates and as Congress decides what to do with those topics. We will respond accordingly.
But nothing has changed in the way the U.S. views the relationship with Taiwan. It will defend Taiwan, as has been.
Yeah, U.S. policy on the issue of Taiwan is unchanged as of today and as of the meeting that we had here today. It was raised. They always raise it on their side. We always make clear our position and we move on to the other topics. We know where they stand and I think they know where we stand.
Do you think China wants to invade Taiwan?
Well, I think China's preference is probably to have Taiwan willingly, voluntarily join them. In a perfect world, what they would want is some vote or a referendum in Taiwan that agrees to fold in. I think that's what they would prefer. Ultimately, it's featured prominently in President Xi's mandate in the time he's been in office. He's made clear that what they call reunification, that's what they call it, is something that has to happen at some point. We think it would be a terrible mistake to force that through force or anything of that nature. There would be repercussions for that globally, not just from the United States. And we kind of leave it there. That sort of ambiguity is what I think has defined the way we characterize this issue. And the reason being strategic ambiguities. We don't want to see conflict. We don't want to see something disruptive happen because I think it would be very disruptive for the world and for both countries.
I know you're watching China. You don't think they're ramping up their military to do something in Taiwan?
Well, I think they're ramping up their military in general. The pace of growth in the Chinese military over the last 10 years has no precedent. Just what they've done with their Navy alone over the last, they've put billions and billions and billions of dollars in their system. So it's, you look at it, it's hard to ignore how fast and how big. So I don't think it's just limited to Taiwan. I think they have ambitions to ultimately be able to project power globally the way the U.S. does now. They're still behind us in that regard. But nonetheless, they are investing a lot of money. They are right now the world's second most powerful military, without a doubt.
補充一下這段，盧比奧是在中國領土上，是在川習會的時空背景下接受 NBC 專訪，人都還在中共地盤，但美方的態度依然沒有改變。中國讓他講他的，而美國也堅定表明立場，不接受有人片面改變現狀。那透過盧比奧談話，我覺得也是美國在提醒台灣人，他講很直接了嘛。因此，要是台灣自己用選票投出親中共的政權，主動展現出想要靠過去給中共管的話，那未來台灣吃中共鐵拳時，美國就算想幫忙也很難插手了。而誰正在積極拉攏台灣站向中國？看看目前由藍白主導的立法院，藍白提案的中配6改4都還沒撤案，並且通過1讀了。藍白推這種有利於中國洗人口的法案，不就是在幫共黨鋪路嗎？藍白修改法律，加速外來人口取得投票權，悄悄改寫搖擺區的人口結構。2到3年後，台灣內部可能就有一群人能合法代表民意，走向統一。目前台灣是暫時還能靠行政權去制衡。但要是之後部分台灣人還是沒看懂這塊，投出更多親中共政治人物，甚至連總統都是親中的話，那就真的沒救了。這部分只能靠台灣人自己抵制。最好的方法就是用選票教訓。各位年底真的要好好投票，特別是2028年的大選，其意義將遠超一般的政黨輪替，而是台灣民主憲政的生死存亡之戰。接着帶各位看一下川普的訪談，這段訪談也是被最多紅媒拿去斷章取義的，很多小粉拿其中幾句話帶風向，說川普不支持台獨，不想幫台灣打仗。但如果看完整段是怎麼說的，會比較清楚完整的語境是什麼。
Should the people of Taiwan feel more or less secure after your meetings with President Xi?
Neutral.
Has the policy changed at all?
No, nothing's
U.S.
changed.
policy?
No, nothing's changed. I will say this. I'm not looking to have somebody go independent and, we're supposed to travel 9,500 miles to fight a war. I'm not looking for that. I want them to cool down. I want China to cool down.
But you're waiting on approving billions of dollars of weapons for Taiwan.
That's right.
Is that
I'm
moving
holding
forward?
it. Well, I haven't approved it yet. We're going to see what happens.
What are you looking for?
I may do it. I may not do it.
Yeah, what's your hinge point?
Well, I'm not going to say that, but I may do it. I may not do it. But we're not looking to have wars. And if you kept it the way it is, I think China's going to be okay with that. But we're not looking to have somebody say, let's go independent because the United States is backing us.
那照順序看完是不是就清楚了？川普這段訪談說的內容啊，也呼應到盧比奧說的，甚至也呼應到過往美國總統說的，就是美國在台面上一定會講，不希望有人片面改變台海現狀。但你仔細聽，加上看現實情況，就知道其實是話中有話。他說，我們得大老遠跑到9500公里去打一場仗。如果川普覺得台灣怎樣都跟美國無關，那美國何必在乎台海爆發戰爭？他會說不想大老遠跑去打一場仗，就是因為川普心裡很清楚嘛，台灣利益攸關美國利益，所以說話方式才會把自己帶入到這件事情的情況中。所以紅媒斷章取義炒這個，我就覺得很無聊。人家整段都也說了，對台政策沒改變，而且我都覺得川普這次談話還算保守了，不然川普說話本來就很狂，之前都還說過中國如果入侵台灣，他要轟炸北京，錄音檔都還有外流出來，他是不是故意的？懂的都懂嘛。中共當時都還對此回應川普，罵他喪心病狂。所以不要只是看美國怎麼說，還要看美國怎麼做的。美國實際上做的就是對台灣有利的，但不全是為了台灣，也是為了美國自己。不過訪談提到的對台軍售的部分，必須得說啊，真的就是被一些台灣人搞砸的。先讓藍白成為國會多數，接着大罷免大失敗，才造就出今天台灣人的共業。不然早在去年，美國就已經跟台灣談好軍售內容了，也都同意說要賣。結果是藍白在那邊擋國防預算，擋到這個月才過，而且還不是全過啊！已經通過的會不會如期進行，都還要再觀察。啊，如果你是美國，你作何感想？做個生意都講好了，那就台灣在那邊撒炮能跑。以及大家去想一下，如果台灣的國防預算去年立法院有正常運作，藍白立委都有好好審查預算的話，那今天軍購這件事啊，根本不會有機會被中共拿來當籌碼操作。再說一次，不要只看美國怎麼說，要看美國怎麼做。川普也一直說習總是他好朋友啊，結果實際上川習會完，中國送的東西全部禁止帶上飛機，通通丟掉。真的朋友會這樣嗎？接着帶各位再看一段講得更詳細的，是川普飛回美國的時候，在空軍1號接受記者訪談。
What did President Xi say to you about Taiwan? And what did President Xi say to you about Taiwan? And are you still going to approve the arms sale?
So President Xi and I talked a lot about Taiwan. He thinks they cannot have anything to do with what they're doing. I mean, he's against very much what they're doing. We talked about Taiwan. We talked about Iran a lot. And I think we have a very good understanding with both. On Taiwan, he does not want to see a fight for independence because that would be a very strong confrontation. And I heard him out. Are you going to say your word? No, I didn't make a comment on it. I heard him out. I have a lot of respect for him. On Iran, it's very interesting. He feels strongly they can't have a nuclear weapon. He said that very strongly. They cannot have a nuclear weapon, and he wants them to open up the strait. But as he said, they closed it, and then you closed them. With a smile. That's true. We control the strait. And they've done no business, literally they've done no business in the last 2.5 weeks, which is approximately $500 million a day. So we have been doing very well on all fronts.
Before we leave Taiwan, Mr. President, President Xi said that there was a risk of conflict with the US over Taiwan. What's your response to that?
I don't think there's a conflict, other than we don't need their strait. We don't need the
on Taiwan, Mr. President Xi said there was a risk of conflict with the US over Taiwan.
No, I don't think so. I think we're going to be. I think we'll be fine. He doesn't want to see a war. And you have two things. You have the Iranian situation, and that I think we agree almost entirely, other than he's a buyer and we're not. We don't need it. And on Taiwan, he doesn't want to see a movement for independence. He says, look, we've had it for thousands of years, and then at a certain period of time it left, and we were going to get it back. They had the Korean War. A lot of things happened. That's all this. But no, on Taiwan, he feels very strongly. I made no commitment either way.
So what about the arms sales to Taiwan?
I'll make a determination over the next fairly short period.
Well, you're not necessarily going to go ahead. It's your proposal.
I'll make a determination. I'm going to see. I have to speak to the person that right now is, you know who he is, that's running Taiwan.
Mr. President, on Taiwan, you said you were going to check with the president of Taiwan, but the 1982 assurances that President Reagan gave said the United States would not consult with China on arms sales to Taiwan. So it sounds to me like you have consulted.
Well, I think 1980s is a long way.
It was.
That's a big far distance.
You dispensed with that?
No, I didn't say anything about it. But certainly, he brought that up. He talked about that to me, obviously. So what am I going to do? Say I don't want to talk to you about it because I have an agreement that was signed in 1982. No, we discussed arms sales too.
And what's his request?
We discussed the Taiwan, the whole thing with the arms sales was in great detail, actually. And I'll be making decisions.
What was his request?
But I think the last thing we need right now is a war. That's 9,500 miles away. I think that's the last thing we need. We're doing very well.
Would the U.S. defend Taiwan if it came to it?
I don't want to say that. I'm not going to say that. There's only one person that knows that. You know who it is? Me. I'm the only person. That question was asked to me today by President Xi. I said, I don't talk about that.
He asked you today. He asked you if you would send troops, if you would
He asked me if I defend them. I said, I don't talk about that.
You tell him that.
I don't talk.
那看完以上3段了，就知道现在网絡上散播以美論的有多八七了，斷章取義，加油添醋，想拐台灣人跪向中共，但等真的被騙去啊，就如同美國國務卿說的，那是中國最想要的，屆時神仙也難救了。國際政治中啊，每個國家本來就是為了自己爭取最大權益，中國是這樣，美國是這樣，我們台灣也是這樣，所以不用說對誰就有濾鏡，因為說穿了，台美之間本質上就是一種互相利用的現實利益關係。美國將台灣視為鉗制中國擴張的第一島鏈核心，美國使用軍力與國際影響力來讓台灣制衡中國，代價是台灣要付錢買武器保護自己，展現捍衛國土的決心，而中國則是想要台灣的主權與一切。中國意圖侵略打壓，想逼台灣人成為中共政權統治下的順民，並實質剝奪現有的財產、自由與生命安全。那在這樣的情況下，台灣人要怎麼選？應該不難選吧？台灣在這場賽局中，看看右邊的美國，是你付錢給我買點武器防身，必要時我當你的保鏢，因為你遭殃，他也不好過。盧比奧受訪也都說了，台海爆發戰爭會影響全球，所以美國不想要這樣。然後看看左邊的中國，嘴上說我們是一家人，結果你說不想當一家人，他就要扁你。但你如果當了他的家人，他又要奪走你的財產，要搶走你的自由，甚至是你身上的零件，還要你聽話，不能罵政府。那台灣人哪會扛起？台灣人假爸沒代誌就被幹賤鋪誒。所以在這樣兩害取其輕的現實主義抉擇下，購買防衛武器與美國各取所需，無疑是保障台灣自身安全的最優解。而且都2026了，美國的軍事實力，我想不會有人質疑了。距離對美國來說啊，也根本不是問題。美國是真的能做到雖遠必誅的。美軍投射軍力的範圍是全地球。以最近熱騰騰的伊朗為例，伊朗離美國本土1萬公里，但美國不也這樣派遣3支航母戰鬥群進行反向封鎖，甚至曾派出 B-2 逆中轟炸機從美國內陸直飛18小時，精準轟炸伊朗地下核設施。所以當川普嘴上說不希望打一場9500公里遠的仗，大家要理解美國背後的意思。實際上，美國除了有把自己考慮進去之外，真要打也不是問題啊。也代表美國內部已經設定好，假設中國侵台，美國就會出兵，視為一種情勢所迫的必然結果。所以，與其被以美論帶風向，台灣人不如多留意自家立法院。最近藍委馬文君凍結海鯤號後續預算119億，阻止你國造潛艦發展。台灣人對我的各位啊，睜大眼睛看清楚是誰在亂搞啊！不要笨到被中國騙去，不花一兵一卒就拿下台灣。沒看到中國迎接美國的列隊跟北韓沒兩樣嗎？台灣若被騙去啊，未來就是你的小孩在那邊跳了。最後帶各位看一段駐美代表於大雷在川習會後接受哥倫比亞廣播公司專訪，幫台灣人向國際發聲澄清。我看完覺得講得很棒。
So China refers to your president as a separatist, in part because Lai has talked about being a, quote, practical worker for Taiwan independence. In an interview with Fox News, President Trump said he's not looking to have somebody say, let's go be independent because the United States is backing us. Does Taiwan have any intention of declaring independence formally from China?
Well, let me first say that President Trump and Secretary Rubio have been very categorical during their visit to Beijing, publicly stating that there's no change in the United States' long-standing position in Taiwan, which we want to express our appreciation for upholding this position. What is meant by Taiwan independence, my president just made a statement recently, just now, and it means that Taiwan is independent from the Chinese aggression, from the PRC, actually. The formal name of my country is Republic of China, and we're not subordinate to the People's Republic of China in any way at all. And that's maintaining our sovereignty, our way of life, our democracy, our vibrant economy, our high-tech production.
Yeah.
And that is what is meant by independence. We are sovereign, independent, away from the Chinese People's Republic of China's attempt to swallow us as one of their own. They have never ruled or controlled Taiwan ever.
Yeah.
So that is meant by independence.
Well, President Trump, though, said he wants Taiwan to cool it. He also wanted China to cool it. That seems to indicate that perhaps he was listening to Xi Jinping's version of events and might have been persuaded.
That's why if we'd love to give in our part of the story, not just listen to cuentos chinos. But I think that's a statement of saying President wants status quo, President Trump, that he wants no change in the Taiwan Straits, neither through economic or military coercion, and that the peace and stability of the Taiwan Straits is good for all parties concerned. And that's the position that Secretary Rubio mentioned during his interview, and that's the one that we also long for. We have been a responsible member of Taiwan Straits. We want to strive for peace and stability. President Trump doesn't want a war 9,500 miles away. We don't want a war. We want peace and stability. We want to have our lives going on as usual. But we're not the ones creating all this trouble. It's like our house, there's intruders trying to get into our house. We're trying to beef up our security system. And then they complain, the intruder complains that because we're trying to improve our security system, it's making his job harder.
Right. Well, I hear your point. And on paper, President Trump's administration has pledged near record amounts of defensive weapons and sales to Taiwan, but the deliveries haven't really been happening. And in Beijing, President Trump told Fox he's going to hold on to the latest weapon sale that Taiwan sought to purchase this year and use it as a negotiating chip with China. What impact will that have on your ability to deter China if you don't get those weapons?
Well, exactly. If we want to prevent a war from happening, I think it's best that Taiwan is strong, be able to defend itself, and therefore we should be able to buy the arms that we need to have a stronger defense. We believe in peace through strength.
Yeah.
So actually it makes more sense for the United States to sell us the arms so we can defend ourselves, and so you don't have to send your army 9,500 miles away to defend us.
那今天影片就先聊到這邊，再次感謝 Celition 贊助本集影片。提醒各位在留言区部分，我会放上優惠鏈接與折扣碼給大家使用。有需要的朋友記得點選鏈接 Celi.com/PorterKing。我是波特王，喜歡我的影片請幫我按讚加訂閱。那我們下次影片見，拜拜。